Good afternoon, dear students. So after the course of module A on research methodology, we entered the module B on research and publication ethics. And to deliver these lectures, we have a distinguished faculty, Professor V.Siruguri. He was the director of UGC DAE Consortium for Scientific Research, which we call as UGC DAE CSR. And he is a physicist by discipline. So it is I'm very happy that Professor Siruguri will be giving the lectures on research and publication ethics. I request Professor Siruguri to deliver the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Tomar. Nice introduction. So, good afternoon, everyone. After this excellent series of lectures on research methodology by Professor Tomar, where you must have definitely learned about various ways to organize your research, as well as also try and present your research results in the form of talks or publications. And so I'm sure this would have been a very nice learning experience for all of you. So now we move on to this module B, which concerns research and publication ethics. So this particular subject has it's a little different from what you would have learned all this while in the last 10 lectures, because the UGC has mandated that you must also be made aware about a little bit about philosophy and ethics, and then on to science and research ethics. So this lecture would be a little offbeat probably for you. Most of you, I guess, are all students of science, but I understand some of you are also students of humanities, but probably the percentage is less. So this lecture, especially for the science students, will be a little offbeat, at least in the initial part. And as you say in Hindi, it will be zara hatke. So let me first also thank the HPNI for giving me this opportunity to give this series of lectures to you. So I start with my topic, which I call it as ethics in research. Now, what do you mean by saying ethics in research, and why do you need this lecture in the first place? See, the University Grants Commission, UGC, has taken a fresh initiative. This was a few years ago, a couple of years ago, to looking at the research scenario in the country. They felt that they must do something to improve the research in higher education institutions. And they saw that there are a lot of issues, especially related to ethics part of research and publications. So they felt that there must be some kind of organized way of addressing this, and then they came up with a volume which is called CARE, C-A-R-E, which I will very soon tell you about. So this is my earlier affiliation, and of course I am right now retired, but I retain my affiliation as well as my email address, and so you can see my email address here. Yeah. So this is my email address. So if anyone of you wish to tell me something or write to me, you are most welcome. Okay, so let's now start with the main subject itself. So as I said, UGC started this consortium for academic research and ethics, and they initiated this basically to promote academic and research integrity as well as publication ethics among the research students and academia in the Indian higher educational institutions, which basically you mean academic institutes as well as universities. And by doing this, they hope to help the Indian academic community to choose, number one, journals, and number two, conferences that follow standard ethical policies. Now, what do you mean by this? Journals or conferences that follow standard ethical policies. This has arisen mainly because in the recent times, apart from the standard journals, international journals as well as national journals, which are fairly well established and are known to follow certain ethical policies, there has been a fresh crop of journals which are termed as predatory journals. And the aim of these journals is not, you see, what is the aim of a journal? The aim of a journal is basically to disseminate knowledge, okay? And that's the way the established journals do it, is that they invite publication of papers or articles from authors or scientists, and then publish them in their journals, which gives them also a certain standing because an important research finding has been published in the journal. So now the
कॉपी केमिकल ऐसे नहीं किसी दिया
Please mute yourself. Amritpal Singh.
okay, sorry. So these journals, the primary.
केमिकल को कहाँ किया सीधा बैठे
Shamal Kanti Bera. Mr. Shamal Kanti Bera, would you mind muting yourself? Okay, so the primary intention of these journals is dissemination of knowledge. And of course, to run a journal, it requires funding, but that is a secondary aspect for these journals. But we have this whole crop of new predatory journals. For them, the dissemination of knowledge part is actually secondary, and what they're mainly interested is money, and they just simply want to make money out of this activity. So that's what these are called predatory journals. There's absolutely the same thing with conferences, where we have certain conferences which are known to be standard conferences, which have been running for years together. And for example, in DAE, it organizes many conferences which have been running for several years. For example, DAE Solid State Physics Symposium is an annual feature every December, which has been running for the past almost 45 to 50 years. So this is a very standard conference. Okay, like that, there are many more conferences, international as well as national, which follow very established standard ethical policies and practices. But there are also, like predatory journals, a new crop of conferences which can be termed as predatory conferences, which have come up, and again, whose sole intention is basically to mint money rather than help in the dissemination of knowledge. So these predatory conferences, they put up very nice advertisements and offers, and they offer, if the price is good enough, they can offer a keynote speaker position to anyone. Okay, which in general has to be offered to a person of very, very high academic standing. So such practices are actually being seen these days, where predatory journals and conferences have mushroomed the last few years. So UGC, on its part, it's very conscious on this, that the Indian academic community, which comprises students as well as faculty, that they should be made aware about such journals as well as conferences, so that you don't fall into the trap of these predatory practices. So by doing this, UGC hopes to improve the quality of research publications which emanate from our academic institutions, as well as they like to enhance the academic integrity and publishing ethics. So now, what I stated earlier about predatory journals, which has been happening, you might feel that nothing is happening on the academic part, where comprising students and faculty. But then problems in ethical issues, they dock even the academic intelligentsia, like faculty and students also. So there are sometimes problems related to academic integrity as well as publication ethics. So UGC would like to improve upon this by making people aware of these issues. So overall intention of UGC has been that the overall quality of research in Indian universities must finally improve on the current situation. So this is the reason for establishment or initiative of this consortium for academic research and ethics chaired by the UGC. So now UGC has mandated that all research institutions must follow a certain coursework for students especially involving research and publication ethics. So in this lecture, I would like to, of course, UGC has already spelled out a syllabus for this module, which I'm sure most of you would be aware of. So I would like to start this lecture in that regard. So the plan would be to give a brief introduction to philosophy and ethics. So this is something which probably most of us as students of science have not bothered about all these years. Some of you, of course, must have already read about philosophy, etc. But me, at least when I was a student, okay, I never bothered to know about what is philosophy or what is even ethics. Okay, but it has become necessary now that the students in field of sciences especially must know a little bit of what is philosophy and ethics. So where does it all start? And then the next would be the ethics to be followed in science and research. So once I give an introduction on these two topics, I go on to the actual bread and butter of this module, which basically starts with intellectual honesty, research integrity, then scientific misconducts. So this is going to be a very important part of this module. Scientific misconduct sorry, there's some interference. Please. Aman Gupta, Mr. Aman Gupta, would you mind muting yourself? Mr. Aman Gupta? Yeah, thank you. So scientific misconducts is a very important part of the module. FFP, fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. So these three aspects are one of the most important things which you people should know about, and how they constitute scientific misconducts, and what are the implications of these three quantities. Then we have redundant publications. What do you mean by redundant publications? So basically you have the same set of results which have been published once. You again try to paraphrase them in a different form and publish them again. Or you find that a particular field of research has become totally redundant and is of no current relevance at all, and you still try to publish in that particular area. So these become what are called as redundant publications. Then we have what is called selective reporting and data misrepresentation. This you still do find this pretty often in many of the universities, especially, and some of the institutions. So, what do you mean by saying selective reporting? So, when you take up a research problem, you find that you start with a certain hypothesis for your research problem, and then you actually carry out the research, and then you get some results. You find that some of the results which you have obtained do not conform to the hypothesis which you have started with. And if you happen to take those particular results into consideration, you might find that it may not fit into your hypothesis and may ultimately cause the other results also to be affected. But then you see, when you find something strange, when you start out by working on a research problem, and if it is not conforming to your initial hypothesis, you should not throw it out. So you may feel that if I throw out this particular set of results, and report only those which I like, okay, I may have a better chance of getting my publication accepted. That is not the right thing to do, because you may find that actually what you found which is not conforming to hypothesis is actually true. And in fact, whatever you're going to report by removing this may be totally false, ultimately. Okay, so then data misrepresentation. So this also is an aspect which is quite similar to what I have told. I will be discussing this in the lectures. Then we have ethical issues and ethical committees. So this is again a minefield for our students especially, because sometimes most of them, they just don't know anything about these two aspects. So ethical issues, there are plenty which come out as I proceed with my lectures. You can see Mr. Pralay Das, would you mind? Mr. Pralay Das, would you mind muting yourself? Mr. Pralay Das, would you mind muting? Mr. Pralay Das, would you please mute yourself? Okay, so ethical issues and ethical committees, they have been established in almost all countries, where they oversee the progress of research and see whether it conforms to this ethics or ethical issues which are followed in that particular place or the country. For example, ethical committees, it is quite common to have ethical committees in the field of life sciences as well as medicine, because in life sciences and medicine, you deal with living things. Again, mostly in life sciences, you deal with animals, and in medicine, for example, you can also even deal with humans. So whenever you deal with living things, it is necessary that you should follow certain ethical guidelines. Like, you should not, you should not be cruel to animals in the process of your research. Animal cruelty is the main issue here. And also, when you deal with humans, it is also required that you do not impinge upon the autonomy of the individual which you are dealing with. Then comes the publication part, where there are issues related to publication, where ethical issues are there related to publications, which I have briefly touched upon earlier. So here also there are many instances where we have a conflict of interest, which I will talk about later and coming lectures. And we have publication misconduct. So this is another important aspect of this whole module, where this mainly concerns with authorship issues. So whenever you conduct a research and carry out a research problem, at the end of the whole thing, when you want to communicate the results, you would like to either do it in the form of a publication in a journal or a presentation in a conference. So whenever you do this, there are what are called authorship issues. That is, who are the people who contributed to your research? So this will have various shades. So this is it's called the credit issue. So how do you give credit to various people who have contributed in your research problem? For example, if you're working under a PhD supervisor, of course, probably your PhD supervisor, he actually designs the problem for you. And then, so naturally, he will have to be one of the co-authors in your publication. Plus, you may have other faculty members or even students or your colleagues will be participating in your experiment, and so who may deserve certain credit in the form of a co-authorship. There will be others who may be just helping you along technically, etc., who may be required to just be acknowledged in your publication. So these are what is called authorship issues. So this must be done properly so that nobody is denied the due credit. Okay, and then there is something called complaints and appeals, where in case there is an issue with authorship, you can always make a complaint to certain committees and then appeals, etc. Then lastly, of course, we have this predatory journals and publishers, which I already touched upon in my introductory slide. So this is roughly the plan of my lecture series. So I start off by giving you a very brief introduction to philosophy and ethics. And at the outset, let me tell you, I think I have already said that I'm not a student of philosophy, I'm a student of science, physics. But having been through all these years working with various research problems as well as people, I have a certain understanding of philosophy which I should follow. So based upon that, I will try to give you an introduction to philosophy and ethics in this lecture. So what do you mean by this word ethics? If you look at the Cambridge or Oxford University dictionary, you can see that ethics is termed as moral principles that govern a person's behavior or conducting of an activity. Okay, so a person's behavior has certain is governed by certain principles, which could be his own, or which he could have imbibed from somewhere else, or he could be following certain principles. So these are what are called ethical principles which he is following. So he is following certain ethics. So basically, it's another synonym for morals or moral principles, ethos, rules of conduct, standards of behavior, moral correctness of some specified conduct, etc., etc. Of course, they are all interrelated. They may not be exact synonyms of the word ethics. Here, of course, students of actual students of philosophy may differ with me here, but this is roughly on a very approximate way. This could be termed as synonyms for the word ethics. So, in a sentence, you can put it as saying that many scientists question the ethics of cruel experiments. Okay. So whether a cruel experiment is ethically correct or not, we'll see in the following slides. So you can also have a branch, ethics as a branch of knowledge or a branch of philosophy that deals with moral principles. Okay. So this is roughly an idea of what is meant by ethics. Then we have philosophy. What do you mean by philosophy? Okay. So how do you define it? Who is a philosopher? As a person. Okay, or what makes something or some issue philosophical? Okay, so what do you mean by philosophy of life, philosophy of religion, philosophy of science? You name it, you can simply attach this word and say philosophy of something. So what do you mean by saying this philosophy? Again, if you look at the Oxford University dictionary, you can see that philosophy is defined as study of fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence. In mind the words, they are very, very particular words used here: knowledge, reality, and existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline. Philosophy can also mean a particular system or a school of thought. Okay, a school of, say, Jain philosophy, Jainism. Okay? School of, say, Advaita philosophy, Ramanuja, Indian context, okay? Or philosophy of, say, Socrates, who is a Greek philosopher. So you can have like the philosophy of Plato, for example. So you can have a particular system of philosophical thought. Okay. Then it can also be the study of theoretical basis for a particular branch of knowledge or experience, as philosophy of science, philosophy of physics or chemistry, etc. Or it can also imply a theory or an attitude that acts as a guiding principle for behavior. So as I said, my philosophy. So what is my philosophy in following life? What is my philosophy in following research? Okay. So this is how you term as you try to define what is philosophy. But if you go deeper into this issue, okay, how do you actually talk about philosophy? So here you can see that philosophy really involves study of questions. And what are these questions? These are questions that do not presently, okay, this is emphasized, they do not presently lend themselves to very clear solutions. So there are certain questions which at this current point of time, they may not have clear answers. So then you term that particular study as a philosophy. Okay. So it's some kind of a way about thinking about questions. So when bare facts are not so clear, then things start getting philosophical. So this is something which you experienced at any time in your life also. Okay. Suppose you set out to get something or do something at some particular point of time in life, and you find out that it turns out that you are unable to do that particular action for some whatever reason. Then you say you become philosophical. You say, oh, that had to happen. That was my karma, something like that. Okay, so it is something like that. So basically, it is the investigation of humanity's most fundamental questions, and again at their most abstract level. So now, to give you some idea about what kind of this involves, you can take any discipline. Okay, take physics for example. Okay, so here in physics, the practitioners of physics at some point of time they will be very often in disagreement. If some theories, you pick up some theory, you can see that there are people who are arguing for the theory, people who are in disagreement with the theory. Okay, so one famous example was, I can show you. Okay, everyone, of course, I'm sure most of you know the figures in the photograph. Okay, like you see one of the most famous scientists, Albert Einstein, but probably some of you may not know this person is Niels Bohr. So around almost 100 years ago, maybe around 90 or 92, 93 years ago, 1925, 1926. So Einstein had a very, very famous argument or a disagreement with Niels Bohr over quantum mechanics. So that was the time when Niels Bohr actually propounded the theory of.
If you want to disconnect it, just click on it, go to switch audio.
Mr. Mehta, Aditya Mehta, would you mind muting yourself, please? Okay, fine, thank you. So Niels Bohr, of course, he propounded the theory of quantum mechanics in 1925, and Einstein had very serious disagreement with the interpretations. Okay, so these were at that time the foundation of quantum mechanics was still not very much established. They were all in the very initial form when the theory was just formulated and propounded by Niels Bohr. So Einstein had quite a number of issues, and again, you can say that these are all philosophical differences regarding the theory. And while Niels Bohr, of course, as you know, quantum mechanics is based on the theory of probability about the particles. You talk about electrons, and you talk about the probability of the electron. So there's an element of unrealism there, okay? So you cannot pinpoint whether the electron is sitting here at this point or not. Whereas Einstein at that point of time was firmly rooted in the philosophy of realism. Okay, so Einstein said that it has to be a real quantity. It cannot be a probable quantity. So this was one of the prime point of disagreement with the theory which Niels Bohr had propounded at that point of time. Okay, so Einstein argued that electrons had an independent reality of their own. Okay, so this was the time when actually Einstein he stated a very famous quotation, which quote which we attribute that God does not play dice. Okay, so that means Einstein wanted to convey that everything has to be rooted in reality, independent reality. And God does not play dice. That means God does not be ambivalent about things. So when God does something, it is perfect. But don't be misled by this quote of Einstein that Einstein probably believed in God. I don't think so. Okay, I don't think Einstein really was a very God-fearing person. Okay, probably he was more of an atheist rather than a theist. Okay. So this was one of the quotation which was attributed to Einstein, and this was a philosophical argument which was which went on for almost 30 years till the time when quantum mechanics was firmly established. But there are certain issues which are still not clear even at this point of time, and which are subject of many theoretical investigations. And if you go back more in time, and a very interesting issue was the loss of motion. See, before, say, Galileo Galilei, who first propounded the initial laws of motion, after which, of course, Newton developed on them and then came out with his actual laws of motion as we know now. So Galileo, in fact, he propounded the laws of motion, but before that, people had no idea about what is motion, how is motion governed, by what laws motion is governed. Okay. For example, I think Aristotle, who suggested that motion is basically things which are moving towards their natural place. So suppose if you drop something, it goes to the ground. So he says that the ground is a natural place for something which is dropped here. Okay. So that was how people theorized and discussed about what could be the laws which govern motion. So till Galileo came along, okay, people just didn't have any idea about how to quantify laws of motion. But once Galileo started or propounded this theory, and once Newton developed these laws of motion, now we know that everything is governed, laws of motion is governed by laws which are very clear cut, and we can predict the motion of anything in the universe, like say the planets, etc., are all governed by laws of motion, which are very clear cut now. Okay, so in that point of time, there are philosophical questions. So this is how you talk about philosophy. So, and some brief idea about who were the philosophers down the ages. Socrates. Now, why do I take the name of Socrates? Why not someone from India, for example? So unfortunately, India, of course, in fact, had many philosophers much earlier than Socrates. But we talk about the Western philosophers like Socrates because from this point onwards, the Western philosophers, they codified their thoughts and their thinking in form of manuscripts or written them down in various ways for people down ahead those times know about what they were talking about. So we have now with us philosophical treatises which are available which have been preserved in the libraries of those days, which still exist. So that's why we say that this is the beginning of Western philosophy. So because we have the written proof of what has happened at that time. It is incredible. 2,500 years ago, we still have some of those transcripts and things which have been written down on either papyrus rolls or even stone or whatever. So who was Socrates? Socrates was a guy who is known as the father of Western philosophy, or the founder of Western philosophy. He was from Athens, a place in Greece. And this was a person who loved asking questions. Okay, so he had philosophized life in a certain manner and then decided to ask questions to people. And also he was very famous for saying this quote, saying that I know nothing. Okay. And this was a person who never wrote anything. He just used to ask questions, discuss with people, and his sole intention was to improve the standards of living of people by asking questions and improving their knowledge. So Socrates he never wrote anything. He was totally, paperless, I would say, whatever. Okay. So his teachings have been documented mainly by his student Plato. And Socrates believed that philosophy should actually achieve practical results for the well-being of society. Okay. And he seek to create an ethical system that would not be based purely on religious doctrines. See, this is very important because in the olden days, religious doctrines were very important and they had a lot of power. But Socrates probably was one of the first few people who decided that ethical systems should not be really based on religious doctrines, but on human reason. So this was a very well-known philosopher at that time. Of course, for these reasons, he was actually put to death because people at that time felt that he was actually corrupting the youth of the country, and also he was being impious. Okay, he was not following God. So he was put to death by poisoning, and this is the famous painting which depicts the scene at that point of time. Okay, then we have Plato, who was a student of Socrates. And Plato was the guy who founded the first so-called an institute of higher learning, or a university as we know of these days. So that he called it as academy, and he established this at Athens. And Plato happens to be one of the most influential, wide-ranging, and dazzling writers in the history of Western philosophy. Okay, and we wrote down a lot of things. And in fact, whatever we know about Socrates, we know it through Plato's famous treatise, which is called the Apology and the Dialogues. Okay, so he was also one of the first guys to discuss ethics and ethical issues. And then he was also the first guy who actually founded what are called the virtues, or what he called the four cardinal virtues. He founded ethics on these virtues, which he called prudence, fortitude, temperance, and justice. So probably he was one of the first person who thought and categorized ethical issues in the form of different ways. Okay. So this was Plato. Then, of course, there were several people who followed down the ages. We had Aristotle, who was a student of Plato. He established what is called the Lyceum. And also, he was known for this very famous quotation, the more you know you don't know. This, in fact, holds even now. For example, I think Einstein also made a very similar quotation. In the same spirit, and then we had others like Thales, who propounded that water happens to be the most fundamental aspect of science or of philosophy at that point of time. Well, Thales and these people were pre-Socratic. And for them, the most important things were the four elements, okay? Fire, water, earth, and water. Okay. And so Thales said water is the most important thing in the world. Why? Only because he saw water in all its forms, as a liquid, as a vapor, and as well as a solid. Okay, so he thought it's something very powerful. So he thought water is the most important thing. There was another guy called Heraclitus who said change is the most important thing. He was very famous for the statement, you don't step into the same river twice. What did he mean by that? He said, once you step into a river, and again, if you step into it, the water is not the same, it is already flown. Already water is gone out. So you're stepping into new water, it's a change. So he proposed that change is the basis for everything. There was another guy who said exactly the opposite, Parmenides, who said, no, it's permanence which is the most important thing. Then came Zeno. See, who was Zeno? Zeno was the guy who had this very famous paradox of Achilles and the tortoise, or the hare and the tortoise paradox, which probably all of you must be knowing about. So what is this hare and tortoise, or Achilles and tortoise paradox? It's very, I'm sure most of you know, but briefly I'll just tell you. See, you have Achilles at one point and hare at one position at some point of time, 0. That means here the tortoise, being known to be a slow animal, is given a head start. And then the gun goes off, or whatever they say, the race starts at time t0. Now at time t1, Achilles, or the hare, reaches the position where the tortoise was at time t0. Okay, but by the time this person or hare reaches this position of the tortoise would have actually moved some extent ahead. Okay, so by the time the person has reached this point, the tortoise has moved ahead. Then the argument follows the same way again. So when this person reaches the position of the tortoise would have moved ahead some bit, whatever. So this goes on infinitely, for example. So what it means that Achilles or the hare can never catch up with the tortoise. Is that true? That's what Zeno said. So it has to be true. You tell me, give me what is the flaw in this argument. He said that as per this argument, this Achilles or the hare will never catch up with the tortoise. Okay, what? Of course, we know the solution. There's nothing to prevent the hare or Achilles catching up with the tortoise. We know that. Okay. But then if you look at the mathematical aspect, what we are dealing with are the infinitesimals. Okay. So, and if you go on and look at the infinitesimals values of time, then of course, definitely this man will never catch up with this point. But anyway, that's another, just wanted to tell you this. There was another person called Protagoras who said that man is the measure of all things. So he said all the water and all these things, they are not, man is the ultimate entity which determines everything. Pythagoras, definitely all of you know about it, okay, the famous Pythagoras theorem. But let me tell you that before Pythagoras propounded or whatever said about, discovered this theorem or whatever, we had our own Baudhain, okay, who lived almost 300-400 years before Pythagoras. Okay. He actually said the same thing. Galileo I have already talked about, and Descartes of course was known for his very famous quotation, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. So he says that's also a philosophical statement. Then there are many more, and we have a lot of philosophers even in the Indian context or the Asian context. So philosophy has been going on for ages and ages till times. And philosophical questions, okay, all these fields of science like mathematics, physics, biology, poetry, politics, astronomy, you take whatever, they were all considered to be philosophy, okay? But then after certain periods of time when people started knowing more and more about things, there were differentiation between these fields, which are again, for example, the above fields like mathematics, so they were all mostly empirical fields. And then there was a differentiation between these fields and pure philosophy. So philosophers of the present day, they still really like or love asking the same question. Okay, very often the same question you were asked thousands of years ago also. And they also don't mind if they never get an answer. Okay, because if they get an answer, then the job is done. Okay, there will not be any more philosophers, or there will not be any positions of philosophy in the university. So this, in fact, continues their business, and so philosophers would like to still keep asking questions for which there are no real answers. But then what are these kind of questions which philosophers ask? Okay. They're very, very strange questions. To you, in the first sight, they may appear very trivial. But then if you go deeper into these questions, you can see that there's a lot of things involved in these questions. Okay. Like, what is a good human being? What is the meaning of justice? Can God exist, and can his existence be proven, or is it just a belief? And sorry, what is a person? Okay, so what determines the individual identity, personal identity? And then what does it mean to know something as opposed to believe in something? Then what makes something artistic? You have a very nice painting. Some of you may say this is a nice painting, but some of you may say that I don't see anything in this painting. Okay, so for some, the painting is artistic. So how does a painting be defined as artistic? So what makes anything in nature artistic? And what is the nature of reality? So these are all philosophical questions. Okay. So then we have what are called branches of philosophy. We have metaphysics, which is most talked about usually, a branch of philosophy that studies the nature of reality or realism. Okay. And then we have others like epistemology, which studies nature and scope of knowledge. Value theory, ethics. So ethics falls under the branch of what is called value theory. Studies and evaluates human conduct and morality. So which is of very much relevant to the present context. Then we have aesthetics, talked about artistic nature of beauty. Then logic, studying reasoning and providing robust arguments that can withstand the test of time. Okay. So these are some of the questions which one needs to know about how to deal with philosophical issue. So now we come to ethics and moral dilemmas. So what is ethics? And why should you be concerned at this stage in your career when you're doing your PhD in physics or science or chemistry or whatever? Why should you worry about, why should you be concerned about ethics? Okay. Is it some kind of a science where some moral truths are waiting to be discovered and those which could be tested and proved? Or is it some subjective way of preference? Say some of you say, you say I like cricket, someone says I like football. So it's a matter of preference. Okay. Or is it some kind of an opinion or some cultural convention? Okay. So we have these concepts of right and wrong. So how do you methodize these concepts of right and wrong? How do you safeguard them and how do you advocate these concepts? Now, a moral dilemma, you say, exists when the available choices and the obligations, they do not allow for moral outcomes. So moral, when you say moral, it concerns humans. It doesn't concern animals. Philosophy doesn't apply much to animals, though there may be some philosophers who may argue that. But I believe that philosophy doesn't apply, ethics does not apply to animals. Okay? It's a human thing, it's a human concern. So a moral dilemma, when does it exist? It exists when available choices to you and obligations. So there are two different things, available choices and the obligations that do not allow for a moral outcome of that particular problem. Okay. Let's see. So how do you define this kind of problem? So I give you a very famous philosophical problem in morality and ethics. This is called the famous trolley problem. So what is this? This is a trolley which is running on some rails or rail tracks. A trolley whose brakes have just failed and it is hurtling down at a great speed on the railway track. Now, on the track ahead of the driver, we have 5 people who are doing some work. And of course, this is a thought experiment, okay? So the so-called Gedanken experiment. So on this track, there are 5 people who have no way of going away or getting out from the track. This is a theoretical issue. You can always say, why can't they get off? But I'm telling you, assume that they cannot get off. So they have 5 people in the track ahead. But then the driver finds that there is another track, the diversion to the right, which he can take by flicking a switch in the track. But on the other track, we have one person who is doing some work. Now, what should the driver do? Should he turn the trolley on the track on the right, thereby killing the one person there? Or does he refrain from turning the trolley and go ahead and where the 5 people will get killed? So what should he do? So is it morally permissible for the driver to kill one person to save many people? Or he should just simply keep quiet and say that it is not my moral obligation at this point of time to turn the train or trolley, and I must just go ahead and leave it to God. Okay, so this is a very typical problem which has been posed to talk about moral issues and ethical issues. So we talk about something called moral realism. So moral realism, we have certain moral facts. So we have all facts laid down, okay, principles which are laid down like scientific facts, which say that these set of principles are wrong and these set of principles are correct. There's no question about it. So if you want to go along the right, do something right, you follow this principle. If you want to do something wrong, you follow this principle. But then if a morality is based on facts like that, then why should there be so much disagreement about what is moral, what is not moral? Okay. So we have that kind of an issue which comes up. So again, just like this absolute uncompromising moral standards in realism, you determine a fact to be either morally right or morally wrong. You can have relative standards where more than one moral position is possible in a particular situation. And one example of this is cultural relativism. Okay, how do you define this one? Here, for example, if you take an issue like death penalty, you see that death penalty is permissible in certain cultures. Probably in India, it's still allowed, it is by law, it is legal. But in some countries, death penalty is not permissible. So here you have one culture which says death penalty is right. In another place, another culture, they say death penalty is wrong. But this disagreement does not prevent the two cultures from being tolerant towards each other and being inclusive towards each other. But is this argument correct? Again, there are certain flaws here. Because if every culture can decide for itself what is right, and then all cultures will be technically, morally perfect. So there's no problem at all. Then what do you think? One very famous example is the question of Hitler, the person who started the World War II. As you all know, in Hitler's regime, we had this whole the large extermination of Jewish people. Okay. But then, why did that happen? Because at that point of time in Germany, the whole body of people, they considered that what Hitler had propounded is correct. So at that point of time, in that culture, that was correct. So if someone at that point of time in Germany would have said that, look, what you're doing is wrong, you should not kill Jews, you would have been considered as totally against the culture in that place at that point of time. Okay. So this is one dilemma which comes up. Then if you talk about realism, then you can also talk about anti-realism. Okay, here there are no moral facts, but only statements which can be either true or false or right or wrong. So here it refers to only people's attitudes. So they may feel that, look, some people may say in the same place, they may say death penalty is right. Some people may say it is wrong. But then it's just an attitude of the people at that point of time and nothing more than that. Okay. So this is an anti-realistic stand. Now you take the case of scientific and technological advances. Invention of the wheel, for example, it made travel easy. Invention of aircraft, it made travel easier. And then we had invention of rockets. We could reach outer space and reach the moon, and many rockets reached outer space. Computers, computation techniques, big data, which is a very big thing now. Telephone, without which we cannot communicate. Medicine, discoveries in medicine, which gave us good life and good health. Nuclear fission, nuclear energy, okay, which is touted as the alternate D solution to most of problems of energy. So these are all advances. But then they had another side to that. Invention of the wheel also made possible the fabrication of tanks and other war machines, which could kill people. Aircraft, we have fighter aircraft which can bomb countries. Rockets also can be turned into missiles at war. Computers can be used to spy on people. Your mobile phones also can be used for many purposes which are not good at all. Medicine, discoveries in medicine also led to biological warfare. And nuclear fission, of course, initially was a very bad thing, one would say, the nuclear bomb, okay, which killed so many people. So all these things are examples of what we could do and what we can also do, what we can do. But then, do you have asked this question, what we should be doing? And what is the right thing to be, we should be doing? I think these are the questions which one must try to address, instead of saying what we can do and what we will do and what we have done. You take the story of Oppenheimer, okay? I don't have much time, but I'll try to finish that. Take the story of Oppenheimer, okay? He was a student of Max Born. He was a leader of the Manhattan Project in the United States, but was nothing but the project for the building of the first atomic bomb. He was the leader of the project. And the first nuclear test was performed on July 16, 1945. Okay, so this was the actual picture of the first nuclear test, the first bomb, for all you know. And then there was this quote which was made by Oppenheimer at that time: radius of 1,000 suns were to burst at once into the sky, that would be like the splendor of the mighty one. And of course, on hindsight, at that point of time, it was a very proud moment for Oppenheimer, okay, when the first test explosion there. But then he had misgivings about it, because 3 weeks later, we had the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. So Oppenheimer realized the power of this weapon which he helped to bomb. And at the end of the war, he resigned from the post as leader of the Los Alamos facility. So though he felt at that point of time the bomb was really morally justified in ending the World War, he believed that he was responsible for the ensuing arms race which followed and the threat to the civilization due to the bomb. And he really regretted his role as the father, to being termed as the father of the atomic bomb. And this sense of guilt actually made him a very vocal supporter of nuclear control. And at the time of the first test, he made this statement, okay, in the press conference, that he remembered the line from Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, that Vishnu is trying to persuade the Prince Arjun that he should do his duty, and to impress upon him, he takes his multi-armed form, okay, the Vishwarupa or whatever, and he says, now I become death, the destroyer of worlds, okay. So is it really impossible for scientists to really ignore the real world implications of work? So this is something which one should talk about. And to help people, one should have what are called moral frameworks, which can give consistent solutions on what is right conduct and what is wrong conduct. So we really need some ethical theories which are built on solid moral principles. But is it possible to have such universal theories? Unfortunately, no, it's not possible. Ethics is a very, very tough issue. And the only way out, or probably one way out, is to use our reason to figure out ethical guidelines for our conduct and then consciously follow those particular rules. So very briefly, I'll try to talk to you about ethics in science and research. Maybe I may revisit this again, depending, because time is over. So do we really need ethics in scientific research? You remember Plato. He equated one virtue with knowledge. Okay, so he said to be virtuous is to know the good, which is changeless, immaterial, transcendent, and absolute. So he says that if ethics could be based on facts, then why is there so much disagreement about what is ethical and what is not? I have just paraphrased this earlier statement of mine, which I showed you. Okay. So if you look at science, okay, there are many views which scientists themselves have. Like they believe that since science is subjective, there are no significant ethical issues here. Scientists also believe they do not require any formal grounding in ethics because it was believed that one learns ethics when you're quite young. In fact, when you're born, very soon, your parents tell you what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad. So once you already have a grounding in ethics at such a young age, you really need to know any other further grounding in ethics. Okay. And so that means if a person is considered already ethical at the time when he joins your scientific career, he would continue being ethical. Why should he go unethical? Okay. So these are all rather misguided views. They don't hold any water. The present day research environment is really prone to problems and constantly needs course correction all the time. And for many young scientists, actually research has become a big minefield of ethical issues. Therefore, the need of the hour is to make yourself aware of the serious ethical issues that you would have to confront at some point or the other in your careers. And it is never too late to learn about ethical issues. Okay, so at this, I would like to stop here today. And so my series of lectures will be continuous. And so this is the first lecture which I have managed to complete. And I'll go ahead in the same vein, and this will be a continuation further down the line. And it will go as per the plan which I have already shown you. And it, of course, conforms strictly to the syllabus which has been described by the University Grants Commission. So thank you for your attention today. So if you have any questions, I would like to answer, or rather I would say I would like to try and answer. So any questions, please? Okay, we start with Mr. Amritpal Singh. Chat message. Okay, Mr. Amritpal Singh. Yeah, we usually get some outliers in an experimental data, and we remove such data points based on some statistical methods. Kindly clarify the scenario relating to research ethics. Yes, a good question. Yes. So as I said, okay, I'll be dealing with this a little more in detail a little later, but I can tell you that yes, if you're already following a certain protocol in your research, in tackling your research problem, and you collect a certain set of data in which you find that, say, one point is badly off the trend which we have seen. Now, here there are two things. Suppose you have a straight line, okay? You have a set of points to which you have fitted a straight line. Now, the set of points would be, say, I would say some 1,000 set of points in a certain field. And you find that among this 1,000 set of points, you have just one or two data points which have fallen out, okay? And fallen out quite badly. You can easily see that they're totally out of the trend of points which you have seen. But then you know that immediately that for two data points in a set of 1,000 data points, if they have fallen out, certainly, most probably, okay, again, statistically I'm telling you, okay, most probably that this is due to a certain issue which would have come up either with the instrument which you have been working with, okay? And based again on statistical methods, which you pointed out, that you have 1,000 set of points which are following a certain trend, and you have just 2 points which are not. One way, of course, is to go to that particular point in the experiment and measure that point again, and then check whether it is really, again, systematically, whether it is again giving you data which is totally off on the trend. There will be 2 reasons. One possibility is that there is a systematic fault in the machine, or rather a fault in the machine which is giving you a systematic error, where when it reaches that particular point, it gives you an error in the measurement. Okay, so that's a problem of the instrument. If you really find that everything is fine, but you still find that there is a data point which is falling off, then there could be something to it. So you better think about it and consult your supervisor or whoever is superior and make sure that that particular outlying point is an error in the data and needs to be removed. Okay, that is a very, very important point here. But if you have very few data points, okay, then it is not possible to remove that data point. You have to go to that point in the experiment, measure it several times to make sure that there is no statistical variance in that particular data point. Okay, so it is very important. Yeah, any other question? I don't know. Let me check here earlier. Now I've become dead. Probably a small change in code. That's fine. Upload this recording on YouTube. I guess that is the policy of HBNI. So I don't have to worry about it. And else, I don't think there's any other question. So let me confirm again. Yeah, I think that's done. So thanks again, everyone. So we'll see you again on Monday, where I continue with my where I have left off today. Okay, bye. One more. Okay.
Please. I'll take it.
Take care.